down onto the open land is to have some good footwear. You'll appreciate that. Anyway, this is the beginning of the boundary of where the BHU came to, and the first thing you'll notice are the shelter belts, which you've noticed. And what are the shelter belts?
Poplars.
Poplars, yes, the Lombardy poplar. And there's no doubt that it is if you can imagine this place as it was in the 1960s, the mid-1960s when I first came to Lincoln, and this was designated to be the horticultural research unit. And you could see the Alps. It was a wonderful spot. You could see from down the back of some Methven and Geraldine, all the way around to the Kaikoras almost unbroken. Fantastic, until the winds got up, of course, and then you really realise what Canterbury is about. But so the poplar is one of the most logical quick fix methods for shelter, and of course that's why you've got a monoculture straight away. So I was talking up the top there, rebuilding the environment, because you go from one monoculture to the next, just a single row of poplars. And I was instrumental in putting these in way back then, being an ignorant horticulturalist in those days. All you do is you cut a few stems and you just stick them in the ground, but then you have to make sure you water them, because this is a very droughty area, and to even get willows and poplars to grow, you really have to take note of the water and irrigation. We didn't have any irrigation in those days, so there was a central irrigator up there, and we used to plant them in ditches, and then we used to flood irrigate. And we used to got as far as we could with the pipes, then just let the water go in the ditches, and the water would go along, and then we managed to get the poplars up and running. But those first years were dreadful down here. So when we radicalised ourselves with the students in the 1970s, first thing we had to think about was how do you make it more biodiverse. And so all through these you will see bits and pieces of tree coming up, which are different from the poplars. But once again, it's very difficult to re-establish growth and biodiversity when you've got poplars, because they're very greedy trees and they take all the moisture, and lots of problems. But anyway, so we did the best we could with those, and then we established another belt, which we'll move to in a few minutes. If you look up the top there, you'll see what they do to poplars. You see, now to me that is dreadful. I mean, if you have any spiritual connection with the land, and if you want to develop any aesthetics, it's you don't turn poplars into a hedge or pine trees into a hedge. Not to me anyway. So how do you manage shelter belts of this nature? So any good ideas?
Have shorter trees.
Have shorter trees.
All
Have a more biodiverse shelter belt. Yes, true. No, but it is a problem. You see, now this is where you've got to have a more holistic thinking about using your environment for good, for self-sufficiency and sustainability. Now we thought that rather than do that to our trees, we would go through and we would select out the biggest and tallest poplars, and we'd cut them down, and we would encourage this concept called coppicing. Many of you will have heard of coppicing. Most of the deciduous trees do, in fact. You can cut them down and they will re-spread. And they will do it again and again. In Europe and many parts of the world, some of the coppice trees are hundreds, if not thousands of years old. And you can still do it. So a renewable resource, wonderful. And of course you can use that wood, although poplar is not the best, as many of you will know, for firewood. Or with the amount of poplars that there are in the horticultural area of Canterbury now, you could probably have quite a good power station generating steam and driving dynamos, and have a sustainable, self-sufficient, carbon neutral kind of power producing unit. But that doesn't fit into the existing paradigm as yet, you see. But anyway, so that's one way, because it's like grass or vegetation. If you reduce the top, you reduce the roots. And so one of the problems with poplars is their roots go right out, same with eucalypts and all the other trees, and it takes all the nutrients out and you have a huge barren area along each side you can't crop. If you keep them small, like the lady here said, then of course the roots won't go out so far, so you won't have as much competition. And so you can keep your plants under, your trees under control by coppicing them down, maintaining them at a lower level, making sure they have the right permeability so that you get reduction in land and all the wind force coming through. All these things we'll deal with in more detail later. But that is utilising a mistake, a monocultural thinking, and trying to adapt it to a much more environmental thinking. Because if we cut them all out and started again, you immediately open everything up to the wind again and you're back to square one, and you don't want that either. So consequently you've got to think about how you can change what was a bad decision into something that has got some good things going about it. Okay? So that's what that was the first example. If we walk down here, you see down here now, and it was when we first, this was put in the early 1980s. And it was a voluntary shelter belt. We invited the people of Christchurch to donate a tree to a biodiverse shelter belt. We had no money in those days. They haven't got any money. We haven't got any money nowadays, so we haven't achieved very much, but still. But all the good species we put in here, and we got a few we didn't really want, but people gave them, so we got them going. So, what's the one in the white flower? Tree lucerne, yes, or Tagesasti. What is the advantage of that? Nitrogen, yes. Bees, yes. Yes. You see, immediately you're starting to be biodiverse. It's got lots of different functions. It will be useful to you in a sustainable, self-sufficient environment. It means you can. It's also very drought resistant. We're in a drought-prone area. So consequently, it's a good thing. But you don't want 100% of it again. So therefore, you still have a lot of other things in here. They're all coppicing species. You can see oak, and you can see willow, and you can see eucalypts. And again, some people don't like eucalypts because they're greedy, they take up water, etc. But if you don't have too many eucalypts, they can be very advantageous because they have ground durable timber if you get the right varieties. They will coppice if you do it properly and get the right varieties. And they have lots of lovely flowers which the bees like, and even which the native birds like the bellbird and the tui and all these kind of things. And then we have the kowhai. Now, as you go around the shelter belt, because you're all going to be very observant people, you'll notice there's quite a few kowhai here, and this is the work of one of our crop scientists, Mike Smetham, who had the idea that there should be a kowhai out for every month of the year in flower, and he started to select from different kowhai around the country for their flowering dates. And so it'd be interesting for you to have a look around and see if some of the kowhais here do flower all at different times. They're really starting to grow really beautifully now, and I actually heard something about Central Otago. Did you hear that on one of the sessions?
Doc was complaining.
Yeah, yes. Well, they always complaining, yeah. But they had the same philosophy,
Yes,
didn't they?
Well, they think that resources are just being put into something that's not that useful. It should be used for other things. But
Yeah,
the school kids are doing it, so
Yeah, and it doesn't take. It's not a resource. I mean, if you're going to plant, everybody says you have to plant native trees now. So why not plant a range of kowhai and select them out so that they flower over a longer period of time? And it gives you a much longer blossom festival in Central Otago, or even in Canterbury. So that's quite good. But anyway, but once again, see the shelter belt is wider. And immediately you come at farmers will say, oh, good land being you, blah, 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 and all that kind of thing. So really, to me, when we started thinking about this and we got all these kind of people telling us that it had to be useful, then we said, well, we must plant, if we're going to take up more land to be more biodiverse, to make a system that's going to be more sustainable and self-sufficient, we still want to use it. And so therefore we must make our shelter belts so that they pay for themselves. And so if you have a diverse shelter belt, all those factors that you mentioned about, I guess, has to come into play. You know, you get bee fodder, you get firewood, you get nitrogen fixing, and you get posts. And yeah, as you know, if you want to be BioGrow certified for wine now into America, you have to have posts that are not treated, and so therefore you need ground durable timbers and so on, or structures that will allow you to be able to be organic without using treated timbers. All of it can be grown in your shelter belt and managed in the same way as you might manage vegetables or fruit or cows or sheep and all the rest of it. It's management of the total environment that we're trying to demonstrate in these kind of things. You use deciduous trees, and if you don't use deciduous trees, remember that bulbs and all these kind of things won't grow because they like the sun. And so you've got all these things that you've got to be thinking about. That's what we've got to get you really into in the next year or so. You see, thinking about all these things. Okay. This has been the greatest disappointment in my life so far from you students, is that I've not yet been able to get a class to take meteorological recording seriously. And I know you can look it all up on your computers and all the rest of it now, but you will find that to develop an understanding of the weather is as important as getting to know an understanding of the soil and the biodiversity needs of the environment. They interact. If you don't understand the climate you're in and the weather you're in, then you will have many, many disappointments. It's really interesting to have a thing like this to refer to, and you should get into the habit of understanding how certainly rainfall, which is very easy to understand, because it gives you an indication of when you're going to want to irrigate. For those of us in the city now, we are going into water restrictions, as you know, as a result of the earthquake damage to the water supply. And so lots of things to think about there. If you're in the city, you should have your downpipes with tanks underneath them from the roof, so that you can take that water. All these kind of things seem so simple to cut down the needs on the environment that we're supposed to be doing. The same with everybody. You go to these so-called new developments like Rolleston, city of the future, it says. You go and try and find how many solar panels there are on people's roofs. And the same with Pegasus, even more amazing. You won't find any solar panels on any roofs in Pegasus. Certainly won't find any water tanks.
They're probably not allowed clotheslines out there either.
That's probably true. So I mean, these are the kind of things that I want you to start putting together, because it's very important. And somebody was saying that, you know, the earthquake has made Cantabrians and Christchurch people in particular very, very much more accepting of sustainability and self-sufficiency. People are really starting to see the vulnerability of our system in cases of emergency. So all these things, compost toileting, solar panels, mandatory water tanks on your houses, to recycling of your grey water in your homes, all these kind of things, these go hand in hand with what you're doing here as well. This helps because it means that you're going to have to use water very much more carefully and not waste it. And a lot of people, without flashing a spray line around and forgetting it and goodness knows what else, you flood your crops one day and then you forget about them the next month.
And then it's raining and things
yeah, and you only have what we call urban rain. So far today, you see, we've had urban rain. All the city dwellers will think it's a miserable wet day, but it's putting no moisture down whatsoever as far as the plants and the soil are concerned. This will help you to come to terms with these kind of things and start to be able to work out when you should be watering and how much watering you should be in. So I will be mentioning this again to you. We do need a new thermometer, and if anybody, and basically we need somebody that's a weather. Are there any weather fanatics here? No weather fanatics again.
Yes.
I think we might be able to find a few. Yeah. because I'm in the Thunderstorm Society of Canterbury, New Zealand, you see, as well. So
Your cloud
chasing thunderstorms and so on. But we don't get much exercise in that around here.
Generate them all.
Anyway, so do think about that, and because it's very, very important, a very, very important aspect. It helps you to understand, because we will still get frosts. I mean, don't think that the winter's over here. This is very frost-prone land. We're on the flat, sheltered. What more could you want than in order to accentuate frost? This is one of the drawbacks of having a beautiful, sheltered environment. You have to think about these kind of things. Okay, well, we'll walk along that path past the outstanding experiences I had was in Kent, in Great Britain, where I went to an organic orchard where I discovered the fellow was apologising because the whole thing had been neglected and he hadn't got round to doing this, that and the other and all the rest of it. And yet on his trees there was not a sign of any black spot, and there was no codling, and because I was already aware of the research that had been done in Canada with regard to biodiversity and all the rest of it, it really did dawn on me that a neglected orchard actually is more successful than one that is closely mowed and all the rest of it. And it's part of the management strategy. But this is probably going a bit too far, you see. And a lot of the orchards here have come from. This one was planted as an organic orchard. The Granny Smith, which we came past, was originally at the other end. We came past. That was planted as a conventional trial before we took over the unit, and we inherited it. And all these were this is kind of the remnants of a connoisseur block of orchard we inherited, which had about 90 different varieties of apple trees and fruit trees in it, from which we selected the best for the organic system. And so this one here represents some of the best varieties in the organic system. So although it's essentially not looked after, it's one of those things where things are not up to scratch. They are all trees which have a high resistance to black spot and mildew, and they don't seem to get over much in the way of codling. But again, it should have been pruned. It hasn't been pruned, which means that the trees will be all right, but you'll get lots of little tiny apples, which are not necessarily the best. And if we get a wet year, because they'll be very dense, it means you won't get air blowing through them, so it will really put any disease resistant under extreme stress. So these are, I don't know are they going to get an orchard area to look after now?
You guys, it depends if you're year one or year two. Year ones, you get 2 Granny Smith trees to prune.
Why not a couple
year
of these?
twos get a whole row.
Good. It is in fact this balsam poplar. This is the balsam poplar. It's a beautiful, really beautiful tree. And if you want a beautiful smell, then that's it.
I have been wondering what that smells like for years. Can someone up at Bulldog around
If you just run your hands along you'll find that all the new growths are all sticky. It's not a good day because it's a bit wet. You come down here on a nice warm day, the weekend. Yeah. Well, there you are. You've got a whole wonderful tree of it. So if you want a cutting for your own property, then be free to take some. And you'll even find some little trees coming up all around it. So it's a wonderful tree this time of the year, and almost for the next month it will be issuing that wonderful smell on a hot day. Lovely to lie down here on a hot day. And of course, you know the cow passing. This was introduced by one of our vegetable specialists of Canterbury, Bill Brandenburg, who was an advisory officer in vegetables in Canterbury in the 70s, 60s, 70s and 80s, and he established the coppice here, which has since been destroyed by the wisdom of the establishments. But and he introduced this because it's one of the earliest umbelliferae to flower, And the umbelliferae are particularly valuable for beneficial insects early in the spring. And so they got very shallow nectaries which suit the small ignumid wasps and so on, which are the ones which come out very early on. So that's why it's here. It's excellent for the orchards. It builds up the predators very quickly in the spring so that you don't get, or you shouldn't get, masses of aphids and so on coming in like so many people find, and if they carry out the sterile earth technique, you know, the cow parsley, Anthriscus sylvestris is what the botanical name is. And you want to try and build up a few botanical names because a lot of these, because these are universal plants in the world, they often go by different common names in different countries, but they all of course use Anthriscus sylvestris as the botanical name for them.
And Frisco, you did,
That is not only for beneficial insects, but also for good timber. It really gives a wonderful environment. You can feel it here. It's so much different having shelter belt like this down here. Massive flowers, something to lift the spirit. The chaplain would really enjoy this place. It's a good place for meditation and enjoying life. Well, we've got to go and look at your plot room here. That's basically the extent of the BHU. It goes from the copses down the bottom to here and goes right across beyond into the next block as well. So there's plenty of land for you. There's 10 hectares here. So there's 35 of them. You have to visualize that you're not opening up gaps. Yeah, so that's what basically lets you, if you think you're going to open up a gap, then you'll leave it till next year, so that that one will sprout this year. Well, you see, that would probably be, this is probably last year.
Okay, yeah.
Theoretically, you need to thin some of these out if you want.